Okay, so I have this kind of weird story, and I'm not sure what to do with it, but I just want to tell it to you guys. So, I call this a divine story to explain where harmony comes from. Okay? Why do I call it divine? Well, because we are referencing the Bible. So, God would be omniscient, omnipresent, and the other omni, it's everything. And then the same note again and on. So it's the chromatic scale, everything. That's what God is. Now, if we want to chop this into two halves, it would make sense to not take this half and that half, but to take this half and this half. At least musically speaking, because it's just easier to come up with a chord or with a melody. Okay, so these are the two halves. They are the whole tone scales, the two whole tone scales that exist. Now Adam and Eve are going to populate the earth, and they're going to create all the other chords. But first, the first generation, at least in music, I don't know how to explain this otherwise, we're going to have 3 children. 3. Each of those will have half of Adam and half of Eve. So what do we get? Well, we get not 2 notes next to each other, another one next to that, but this. This part of Adam will be in the first child, this in the second child, and this in the third child. It's all equally distributed. And then again, this will be in one child, in another child, and then another, departs from Eve. So what do we get? Well, we get a diminished chord. That's one quite logical way. I'll get to why it's logical in a second, but one logical way to take half of Adam and half of Eve. Right? Move it up a half step. Again, we got a different part of Adam and a different part of Eve. Up a half step, we got a different part of Adam and a different part of Eve. And then we get the first chord again. Okay. That's what makes this only 3. You can each inversion of a diminished chord sounds like a new diminished chord, I guess, or each diminished chord is an inversion of 3 other diminished chords. Whichever way you want to conceptualize it, a diminished chord is made of nothing but minor thirds. Each all minor thirds. And so I thought 3 different ones. Now, diminished chords have a very special place in music, a special function. They let us move from anywhere to anywhere. And every single 7th chord looks a lot like a diminished chord. So let's test that little theory. I'm just going to take any diminished chord and we're going to lower 1 note. This is B7. Lower a different point, you get D7, F7, and A flat 7. Okay? Let's raise 1 note. Now we got half diminished or minor 6th. So if this is the 1, this is the 3rd, this is the 5th, and the 6th. Okay, or if this is the 1, then this is the minor 7th, this is the minor 3rd, and this is the diminished 5th. But half diminished and minor 6th are inversions of each other, and if we raise 1 note, then we get this. You get minor 6. I'm just going to call it minor 6 for now, okay? Funny enough, minor 6th and dominant are each other's negatives. And if we're talking about negative harmony, a dominant chord typically becomes a minor 6th. they're each other's negatives. So instead of lowering one note from the diminished, raising one, we get the negative of what we had a second ago. I think that's pretty interesting. Anyway, right now we've got E flat half diminished or G flat minor sixth. Raising another one, A minor sixth, raising another one, C minor sixth, and then raising another one. Oh, I got trouble with this. E flat minor 6. No, what am I saying? Yes, E flat minor 6. Okay. Now, we can lower or raise a note by a whole step, a whole tone. But that's just going to end up being the same thing. If we... well, it's not the same thing, actually. It's not the same thing at all. Ooh, what do we get there? That's wild, isn't it? It's not a common 7th chord. I thought for a second that it would be the same thing because whenever I lower this note by a half step, it's the same as lowering this note or raising this note by a whole step. But if we keep all the other notes, then it's not the same at all because this note A is still represented in the chord. Anyway, we're going to keep moving by half steps because we're interested in chords that are as much as possible like a diminished chord, and so moving in half steps, well, it would be better voice leading, so to speak. This time we're going to lower 2 notes by a half step. Okay, let's take 2 notes that are right next to each other. We'll lower them both by a half step. What do we get? Minor 7. There's minor 7. Now I'm not going to do all the inversions every time. I'm just going to move on. What do we get if we take 2 notes that are not next to each other? Well, let's take a look. Ooh, that's an interesting one, isn't it? This is what I would dub the tritone substitution. If you see that, it's F with a major third and a minor 7th, so that's F dominant, but we got a flat 5 or an augmented 4th. So this is the tritone dominant. We've had a dominant, a minor 6th, a minor 7th, and the tritone dominant. Now, if I lower these 2, it's the same as lowering 2 that are right next to each other, because they are next to each other, right? So we're not going to do that again. Now we are going to raise 2 notes. Let's see what happens. Well, that's interesting. Another minor 7th, this time by raising. Okay, what if we raise 2 that are not next to each other? Again, the tritone. Let's consider it E flat with a minor 7th and a major 3rd, and then the augmented 4th or flat 5, diminished 5th. So, raising or lowering gives us the same results. Well, at least in color, in terms of chord color. Now, let's lower one and raise another. So we're going to lower this and raise this. Let's see what happens. It sounds like a dominant sus4. It is a dominant sus4. This time, let's raise this and lower this. What do we get? There's major 7th. Right? So that's how we get there. Now we're going to take these 2. Raise one, lower the other. We're going to lower this, raise this. What do we get? Well, for one, we get an interesting chord. and I gotta check it out for myself as well, because to me it just sounds like a dominant with a minor minor 6, minor 13. You could conceptualize it as an G augmented with a 9, right? That's one way of looking at it. But we're getting into freaky territory right now. Let's see if I can have another conceptualization that makes more sense. I mean, as an A chord, it would have a minor 7th, but it would have a 9th and an augmented 11th, so that's not very useful. As a B chord, it would have, well, that's what I mentioned before, B7, with a minor sixth. Okay, I'm just exploring at this point. So let's raise this and lower that and see what we end up with. The same weird little chord. Okay, I think this is pretty interesting. 3 notes. Well, if we're gonna do 3 notes, we're gonna have to be mindful of it, because lowering 3 notes is the same as raising 1, right? So we're gonna have to mix up which we raise and which we lower. We're gonna lower these and raise that. I'm just curious to see what we get. A pretty 9 chord, or 2 chord, I would say. Just G2. Okay, I'm gonna stop the exploration for a second. I hope you're gonna continue exploring from here on, but the diminished chord lets us go basically anywhere we wanna go. Any kind of chord you can imagine is close to a diminished chord. And so going from chromatic to the whole tones, which is symmetrical, to the diminished chords, which are symmetrical, to me seems like a pretty interesting way to conceptualize harmony. And then from there, trying to come up with all the other chords that you can make, combining notes from 2 different or 3 different diminished chords. I don't know, it seems interesting to me. So I wanted to share this with you guys. This is my little random explainer. If you like this content, you can subscribe, and then you actually get more of it on your feed, so consider it.